It begins on a street where nothing ever seems out of the ordinary. A quiet cul-de-sac in Bushey, neatly trimmed hedges, soft porch lights glowing in the summer dusk, and a family home that radiates warmth from the inside out. A place where birthdays were celebrated, where sisters shared secrets, where a mother closed the door every night knowing her daughters were safe. Tonight, that sense of safety is only an illusion. On the front door sits a simple device, a doorbell camera, silent, unassuming, always watching. And at 9 p.m., it captures something that should have been ordinary. A visitor, a familiar figure, someone returning belongings, someone who once shared laughter with this family. A man who quietly steps into frame and brings a nightmare with him. The camera records the moment Carol Hunt opens the door, warm, polite, unaware. She believes this is just a brief exchange, a moment of closure after a difficult breakup, a chance to move forward. But as she steps aside to let him in, she has no idea she is letting danger into a place she considered safe. No raised voices, no warnings, just a door that closes, and a house that suddenly goes still. From outside, nothing appears wrong. The street remains quiet. Neighbors settle in for the night. And inside the Hunt family home, something irreversible is beginning to unfold. The doorbell captured a beginning, but what follows cannot be seen from the porch. A community on edge. A crossbow recovered by investigators. Police tape stretching across a peaceful street. A 22-hour manhunt gripping the nation. A family wiped out in a single evening. A suspect found injured in a quiet cemetery. Each moment more unbelievable than the last. What happened inside that house is a story that stunned the entire United Kingdom. A story of love, obsession, heartbreak, and a level of violence few could ever imagine unfolding behind the door of a family home. This is the Hunt family case, and the truth behind that final knock is far more shocking than anyone realized. Before the headlines, before the manhunt, before the United Kingdom found itself mourning 3 lives at once, there was a family defined by love. A family that cared for one another in ways both quiet and profound. A family whose home was filled with warmth long before it became filled with fear. To understand the tragedy, we must first understand the people at the heart of it. Not the shock, not the crime, but the lives, connections, and gentle moments that made the Hunt family so deeply cherished. Because behind every news story is a world of memories. Birthdays celebrated, jokes shared around the dinner table, late-night conversations, the familiar comfort of everyday routines. And for the Hunt family, those memories were their heartbeat. Carol Hunt was not just a mother, she was the foundation. The steady presence who grounded her family with warmth and care. Friends describe her as the person you could rely on, whether you needed advice, a listening ear, or simply someone who made you feel understood. Her smile was soft, her nature gentle, and her love for her daughters, unbreakable. Carol had built a life filled with meaning. Her home was always open, always welcoming, always a place of peace. She was married to BBC racing commentator John Hunt, a man whose voice had become familiar to many across the nation. Together they created a home that was safe, supportive, and filled with laughter. When John worked long hours or traveled for events, Carol was the anchor that kept everything running smoothly. She was the person who made sure birthdays were remembered, that holidays were special, that her daughters felt seen and valued. Those closest to her often said the same thing. Carol didn't just raise daughters, she raised strong, kind women. And she took pride in that. Every achievement her daughters made, every milestone, every step toward independence, Carol celebrated them all. She was not prepared for the moment danger walked into her home, but every moment before that night proved one thing: Carol Hunt loved fiercely. And she spent her life protecting the people who meant everything to her. If Carol was the foundation of the family, her daughters, Hannah and Louise, were its light. They were different in personality, yet inseparable in spirit. Hannah, the older sister, was known for her bright mind and thoughtful nature. She had a calmness that made people gravitate toward her, a quiet confidence that said she understood the world and moved through it with intention. She was planning her future with excitement, exploring paths that would give her opportunities to grow, learn, and experience life on her own terms. Her friends often described her as the kind of person who remembered little details about your day, who checked in when she sensed you needed it, and who carried an empathy far beyond her years. Her bond with her mother was particularly strong. They shared long conversations, gentle humor, and a mutual respect that made their relationship special. But the bond she shared with her sister was something unique. A connection formed not just by family but by shared experiences, shared dreams, shared laughter. Louise, the younger sister, brought a different kind of energy into the world. Creative, caring, filled with ideas and a deep love for animals. Her passion led her to build her own dog grooming business, a dream she had nurtured with care and determination. Her clients loved her gentleness, her patience, her ability to form trust with the animals she worked with. Friends say she had a heart that was too big at times, that she always tried to see the good in people, even when they didn't deserve it. She was funny, kind, and full of quiet strength. And she loved her family fiercely. When Louise went through difficult moments in her personal life, especially in the months before the tragedy, it was Hannah she turned to. And Hannah, always steady, was there every step of the way. Together they were more than sisters. They were best friends, laughing, confiding, and navigating life side by side. Bushey, a suburban enclave in Hertfordshire, is the kind of place where people walk their dogs in the evening, where neighbors chat at their front gates, where children ride bicycles down the street without parents worrying if they'll make it home before dark. It's quiet, calm. A community where people know one another by name, where trust is woven into everyday life. It's the kind of place where tragedy feels impossible, or at least something that only happens far away. The Hunt family fit seamlessly into this environment. They were respected, kind, and deeply woven into the fabric of the neighborhood. People waved when they saw Carol in the garden. They smiled when Louise opened her small grooming business. They knew Hannah as the polite young woman who carried herself with quiet grace. Nothing about the Hunt family seemed unusual. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing hinted at danger. And that's what makes what happens so devastating. Because the most heartbreaking tragedies are the ones that begin in places that should have been safe. As we look at the smiling photographs of the Hunt family, birthdays, holidays, warm moments captured in time, it's impossible not to feel the weight of what was lost. A mother, 2 daughters, a family filled with love. Yet, as with so many true crime stories, there were moments hidden behind those perfect images that outsiders could not see. Moments of tension. Moments of fear. Moments of quietly building danger. Moments that would eventually collide with a darkness none of them could have predicted. And so, as we step deeper into this story, we must hold those truths carefully. Behind every perfect picture, there are moments no one sees. Moments that reveal everything we wish had been stopped before it was too late. Before the tragedy, before the headlines, before the impossible grief that would ripple across the United Kingdom, there was simply Carol, a mother who believed in compassion more than anything else. Carol Hunt was born into a hard-working family, raised on values that never left her: be kind, be patient, be present. From her early childhood, relatives remember her as the girl who could calm turmoil with a soft word or a gentle gesture. Teachers described her as empathetic, steady, and wise beyond her years. When she met John Hunt, the man who would become a beloved BBC racing commentator, their partnership was built on mutual respect. Friends often joked that they were a team of opposites. John's lively sports world energy balanced by Carol's grounding warmth. They built a home defined by laughter, photographs on the walls, and daughters who always felt supported, loved, and encouraged to grow into themselves. Carol's role wasn't loud. It wasn't public. But it was the kind that holds everything together. She was the mother who never forgot birthdays. The neighbor who always asked how someone was really doing. The friend you could call in the middle of the night. The kind of person others felt safe around. In Bushey, Carol became known as the woman who remembered names, who volunteered at community events, who took time to listen. Her life was proof that gentleness is strength. And at the center of her world were her daughters, Hannah and Louise. She nurtured their talents, celebrated their quirks, protected their spirits, and stood beside them through every milestone. She encouraged Hannah's ambitions. She supported Louise's creativity. She believed the greatest gift she could give her children was the certainty that home was a place where they would always be understood. Friends described her as the glue of the family, a warm-hearted soul, gentle but incredibly strong. She was the mother who sensed when something wasn't quite right, the one who paid attention even when danger didn't look like danger at all. Foreshadowing became part of the story without her ever knowing it, because Carol always looked out for her daughters, even when the threat wasn't obvious. If Carol was the family's grounding force, Louise was their quiet spark, the daughter with a deep love for animals, creativity flowing from her hands, and the resilience of someone still learning who she was meant to be. From childhood, Louise had always been gentle. She preferred the comfort of close friendships to large crowds, the company of animals to the noise of the world. As she grew older, that gentleness became her strength. Family members remember the years she spent helping with pets, volunteering, and nurturing every creature that crossed her path. Her bond with her mother and sister was unmistakable. They were each other's support system, sharing jokes, late-night talks, family dinners filled with stories. Louise admired her mother's patience and looked up to her sister's ambition. In return, they encouraged her dreams. Her passion for animal grooming began as a small hobby but soon grew into something bigger, a vision for a future where she could build a stable, creative, fulfilling life. Her business wasn't just income. It was her identity. She found meaning in transforming nervous, scruffy pets into confident, well-cared-for companions. Each dog, each cat, each moment of trust made her feel she was doing exactly what she was meant to do. Her friends describe her as quiet but determined, artistic with a soft smile, more confident than she realized, someone who deserved a peaceful life. But like many who give their hearts generously, Louise struggled in relationships. She had endured heartbreak before, yet she kept believing in love, kept believing people were mostly good. Then came Clifford. At first, the relationship seemed promising, until it wasn't. There were moments she brushed aside, moments she explained away, moments she wished were different. The signs that something wasn't right existed, but they were subtle, tucked between small arguments, emotional tension, and growing discomfort. Eventually, Louise made the difficult decision to end the relationship. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was simply a choice rooted in self-respect and the understanding that she deserved peace. But breakups don't always stay in the past. Feelings don't always fade quietly. And some people don't let go. This is where the story begins to bend toward danger, but Louise never imagined how far that danger would go. Where Louise was quiet, Hannah was vibrant, full of energy, humor, and ambition. She was the daughter who lit up rooms, who pushed herself academically, who envisioned a future filled with opportunity. Hannah excelled in school, always aiming high. She wasn't just hardworking, she was passionate. She had plans, goals, and a desire to make a difference, whether in her career or in the lives of the people she cared about. Her friends say she had a unique blend of intelligence and warmth. She could turn a stressful moment into a joke, a difficult day into something manageable. Her humor was her gift, one that made her deeply loved by those around her. But Hannah wasn't just the funny one, or the smart one. She was the protector. When her mother needed support, Hannah was there. When her sister needed understanding, Hannah listened. When the family faced challenges, Hannah stepped forward without hesitation. Her caretaking nature wasn't forced, it was instinctive, a reflection of the love she grew up with. She had dreams of building a life that honored the values Carol taught her: kindness, stability, compassion. She envisioned a future where she could support her family, travel, grow in her career, and create memories with the people she cherished. She was young, full of potential, standing at the very beginning of her adult life. A future that would never arrive. A bright path cut short by a moment no one could have predicted. Long before his name ever appeared in news headlines, before the manhunt, before the shock that gripped the nation, Kyle Marcus Clifford was simply a quiet boy growing up in Hertfordshire. A child who, from the outside, looked ordinary, almost forgettable. But in the details of his early years, something darker was already forming. Kyle's family life wasn't chaos, nor was it warm. It existed somewhere in between, functional enough to appear stable, distant enough to leave emotional gaps that never fully closed. People who knew him as a child recall a boy who kept to himself, who avoided conflict yet simmered with frustration beneath the surface. He wasn't expressive. He wasn't affectionate. He internalized everything. Teachers often described him as reserved, intelligent but detached, easily frustrated when things didn't go his way. He wasn't a troublemaker. He didn't rebel loudly. Instead, he learned early on that control, even in small, subtle forms, made him feel safer. He organized his belongings obsessively. He repeated routines until they became rituals. He grew uneasy when plans changed or when people didn't behave the way he expected. These were small details, barely noticeable to most, but they became the foundation for something deeper, an insecurity that followed him into adulthood. Kyle wasn't the child who exploded outward. He was the child who imploded inward, growing quiet, growing tense, growing convinced that order was the only thing protecting him from his own anxieties. As he reached his teenage years, this internal rigidity intensified. Friends recall moments when he would become defensive over minor disagreements, shutting down emotionally, withdrawing for days. He struggled to articulate his feelings, leaving them to fester into resentment. He didn't understand relationships, not truly, not the give and take, not the compromise, not the vulnerability, but he did understand discipline. And so, when the time came, he pursued a path he believed would give him structure, validation, and a sense of identity. The military. It was a decision that looked admirable from the outside, but inside him, it fed a part of his personality that would later become catastrophic. Kyle Clifford's time in the military was short, but it left a mark that never faded. He entered training looking for purpose, searching for belonging, structure, and a set of rules that wouldn't change without warning. In the military environment, he found what he had always craved: strict routines, clear expectations, and a clear hierarchy. On the surface, Kyle thrived. He followed orders. He kept his head down. He built the physical discipline expected of him. He cultivated an image, strong, controlled, focused. The kind of persona that suggested calm confidence. But beneath that image, the emotional instability he carried since childhood continued to grow. Several people who trained with him later noted his intensity during drills, his quietness during downtime, his discomfort with social interaction, his difficulty handling criticism. He wasn't violent. He wasn't unpredictable. He wasn't the stereotype of a troubled recruit. He was something more subtle and more concerning. He idealized control but lacked the emotional resilience to cope when he didn't have it. He craved approval but feared rejection. He wanted connection but didn't understand the boundaries necessary to keep relationships healthy. Inside the structure of the military, these issues were contained. Outside of it, they were not. The discipline didn't fix him. It simply sharpened the traits he already had. His posture grew straighter. His determination grew stronger. But so did his possessiveness. So did his rigidity. So did the intensity with which he clung to anything that felt like stability. And relationships, romantic ones especially, became the place where that intensity settled. He didn't understand partnership. He understood ownership. He didn't understand compromise. He understood compliance. He didn't understand healing. He understood control. To those around him, the signs were faint. To the person he would eventually date, they became impossible to ignore. The beginning of Kyle and Louise Hunt's relationship was, on the surface, unremarkable, gentle, slow, almost shy. They met through mutual circles in Hertfordshire, and at first, Kyle seemed like a supportive, soft-spoken partner. He wasn't the loud, boastful type. He wasn't flashy. He didn't come across as threatening. To someone like Louise, creative, sensitive, kind, his quietness felt safe. He listened. He appreciated her work. He admired her dedication to her animal grooming business. In the early days, there were moments that felt tender. A message checking if she got home safe. A compliment delivered with sincerity. A willingness to help, to show up, to make time. But gradually, the attachment came too fast, and too intensely. Kyle seemed to anchor his sense of self to the relationship, acting as if losing it would mean losing everything. What looked like attentiveness soon revealed itself as monitoring. What looked like protectiveness became possessiveness. What looked like concern became interrogation. He'd question who she talked to. He'd become defensive when plans didn't involve him. He'd take small disagreements personally, shutting down or withdrawing as if betrayed. Louise noticed the shift slowly because it happened slowly. One moment at a time. One conversation at a time. One uncomfortable feeling at a time. Friends recall her mentioning, "He can be intense. He gets upset over small things. I don't understand why he reacts like that." But she tried to be patient. She tried to give him space to grow. She tried to believe he could adjust. Instead, the pattern deepened. Where Louise sought balance, Kyle sought control. Where she wanted communication, he wanted compliance. Where she tried to establish independence, he interpreted it as rejection. Eventually, Louise realized she needed to end the relationship, not because she wanted conflict but because she wanted peace. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't hostile. It was simply a quiet recognition that the relationship was no longer healthy. But to Kyle, it wasn't just a breakup. It was a collapse of the identity he built around her. A loss of the stability he believed she owed him. A rejection he could not accept. And what he did with that rejection would shape the tragedy that followed. But it was what happened after their breakup that would seal the Hunt family's fate. For Louise Hunt, the months before the tragedy were a period of growth. Quiet, determined growth. Her small animal grooming business was beginning to find its rhythm, attracting loyal customers who admired her talent and gentle approach. She poured her time and energy into it, shaping her dream into something real. And as her independence strengthened, her feelings for Kyle Clifford began to fade. Louise wasn't the type to end relationships abruptly. She cared deeply. She tried to be patient. She tried to understand him. But she also recognized the increasing tension, The way Kyle reacted when she made decisions without him, the way he questioned her schedule, the way he grew uneasy whenever she carved out time for herself. Where Kyle craved closeness, Louise needed balance. Where he clung tighter, she stepped back for air. She began to confide in her sister Hannah, the person who knew her heart better than anyone. Their conversations were soft, private, sisterly, filled with quiet concern rather than drama. Hannah reassured her, "You deserve peace. You deserve someone who supports your dreams, not someone who suffocates them." Louise listened. And slowly, gently, she began to distance herself. To Kyle, that distance felt like abandonment. His messages became more frequent, more questioning, more emotionally heavy. When Louise didn't reply instantly, he grew anxious. When she focused on her business, he felt threatened by her independence. He interpreted her personal boundaries as closing doors. The balance in their relationship shifted. Clifford's emotional insecurity deepened into fixation. Moments that should have meant nothing, missed calls, changes in plans, silence, became triggers for him. He began showing up unexpectedly. He'd appear outside her workplace, claiming coincidence. He'd message her late at night, asking if she was still upset even when she wasn't. He would linger too long in conversations she tried to end gently. These were not violent acts, but they were red flags, early indications that Kyle could not accept the emotional distance Louise needed. And once Louise began stepping away, he convinced himself that she was slipping beyond his control. His calm exterior became a mask. Underneath, resentment began to simmer. The relationship ended not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a moment of clarity, a moment Louise had avoided but could no longer delay. There was no single explosive event, no shouting, no public spectacle. It was the culmination of weeks of discomfort and emotional exhaustion. The final incident, as friends later described it, was simple. Kyle reacted intensely to something small. A missed reply. A rearranged plan. A comment he misinterpreted as rejection. Louise realized then that she was spending more time managing his emotions than living her own life. She deserved balance. She deserved stability. She deserved the space to grow. So she made the decision, cautiously and gently, to end the relationship. Kyle didn't argue. He didn't lash out. He didn't raise his voice. At least not on the outside. He responded with phrases like, "I just want closure. Can we talk one more time? I need to understand what changed." But beneath these calm messages, a storm was forming. Friends who saw him afterward described him as obsessed, unable to move on, emotionally unraveling. He began monitoring her online activity. He asked mutual acquaintances about her. He would drive near the places she frequented, claiming it was coincidence. He convinced himself that she owed him attention, owed him explanations, owed him another chance. Publicly he appeared composed, quiet, polite, functioning. Privately he felt humiliated, rejected, destabilized. His identity had wrapped itself around the relationship. And without it, he spiraled into a state of emotional freefall. The breakup wasn't a conflict for Louise. It was a boundary. For Clifford, it became an obsession. After the breakup, Kyle's emotional decline accelerated in ways he hid from nearly everyone. The quiet, contained demeanor he had maintained since childhood began to fracture. He isolated himself, pulling away from friends, withdrawing from social circles, reducing his life to a narrow focus. And that focus was Louise. Friends later recalled that he seemed distracted, vacant, unable to engage in normal conversation. His thoughts revolved around one topic: understanding the breakup, reversing it, controlling it. He convinced himself that the relationship wasn't over. He convinced himself that she was simply confused. He convinced himself that with enough persistence she would come back. This fixation grew into routine. Checking her online status. Driving past familiar places. Replaying old conversations in his mind. Rewriting events in ways that justified his growing resentment. The breakup had stripped him of something he needed: control. And when control slipped away, he began planning ways to take it back. Not violently. Not chaotically. But methodically, quietly, obsessively. He started withdrawing money. He purchased equipment he had no legitimate use for. He visited shops looking for items that would later become central in the investigation. Among those items was a crossbow, a weapon that requires intent, preparation, and deliberation. A weapon that doesn't end up in someone's possession by accident. Investigators would later determine that this purchase was a turning point. A moment when obsession transformed into planning, and planning shifted into something far more alarming. Kyle was no longer coping. He was collapsing emotionally, mentally, and morally. In his mind, the breakup wasn't the end of a relationship. It was a challenge, a wound, a personal failure he believed he needed to fix. And he convinced himself that the Hunt family, especially Louise, held the answers he was entitled to. Every step he took afterward was deliberate. Every movement calculated. Every decision shaped by fixation. He was no longer a rejected boyfriend. He was a man preparing for a moment of confrontation. And then came the day he walked up to their door. In the final 24 hours before the tragedy, life inside the Hunt household was calm, ordinary, and filled with the warmth the family was known for. Carol Hunt spent her time taking care of the home she cherished, while her daughters moved in and out with the familiar rhythm of everyday life. Nothing in the air suggested danger. Nothing hinted at the storm approaching their door, and then, from Kyle Clifford's perspective, came an opportunity. Louise still had a few of her items at his place. A sweater. A small bag. Personal belongings she never felt rushed to retrieve. For Clifford, these items became more than objects. They became symbols, of rejection, of loss, of the control he no longer had. So he reached out. He arranged to return her things. It was a simple message, polite and subdued. A gesture that seemed responsible, normal, harmless. Louise agreed. There was no reason not to. But when the time came, she wasn't the one who opened the door. It was Carol, the mother who always protected her daughters. The woman who trusted the world more than it deserved. The person who believed this would be a quick, quiet exchange. And as she stepped toward the door, the doorbell camera captured the beginning of the tragedy, not with violence, not with sound, not with a visible threat, but with a man standing still, waiting. A frame. A moment. A quiet visitor arriving with a calm that didn't belong to him. Carol had no idea he didn't come alone. What happened inside the Hunt family home must be told with sensitivity, because the home was not just a crime scene. It was their sanctuary, their safe place, their world. Once Carol opened the door, Clifford crossed the threshold, and with him came a tension that escalated quickly. The confrontation began with words. A conversation Carol likely believed she could calm. She was known for her compassion, her steadiness, her ability to de-escalate. But Clifford was not the same man Louise had once dated. He had arrived at that doorstep already emotionally broken, already determined, already consumed by fixation. Inside the home, his tone shifted. The frustration he had tried to hide surged forward. His composure cracked. His voice grew sharp, insistent, demanding. Carol, instinctively protective, tried to shield her daughters from the rising aggression. She had always been the stabilizer, the peacemaker, the heart of the home. But this moment was different. This wasn't an argument. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a man unraveling. And then, in the middle of this rising tension, Louise walked inside, returning home unaware of the danger that had already taken root. She entered the space with no anticipation of conflict, carrying the casual energy of someone stepping back into the home she loved. Her presence escalated the situation immediately. Clifford's emotions surged. Words turned sharper. Control slipped further. Outside, the house remained silent. To passing neighbors, everything looked normal, just another peaceful evening in Bushey. But inside, the air thickened. The conflict multiplied. The walls of the home absorbed a nightmare unfolding in real time. The timeline investigators later reconstructed showed how quickly everything escalated. A conversation turned tense. A confrontation deepened. Panic rose. Choices spiraled out of control. And within minutes, the safety of the Hunt home was shattered. At some point during the unfolding chaos, Hannah Hunt arrived at the house. She had no reason to expect anything was wrong. Her visits were frequent, natural. This was her family home, her safe place. But as soon as she walked through the door, she stepped into the middle of a storm she didn't even know existed. Her arrival created a final emotional collapse inside Clifford. 3 women. A family united. A family he felt had rejected him, protected Louise from him, reinforced the boundaries he could not accept. The confrontation intensified. There was shouting. Panic. Fear. Desperation. The Hunt women, deeply loyal to one another, stood together. They tried to calm him. They tried to reason with him. They tried to protect one another. But the situation had already crossed a point no one in that home could reverse. The final moments were chaotic, heartbreaking, and fast. All 3 victims, Carol, Louise, and Hannah, were overwhelmed within minutes. They had no time to escape. No way to call for help. No chance to understand the depth of Clifford's decline until it was far too late. And then, silence. The kind of silence that only exists after something irreversible has occurred. When the chaos ended, Clifford fled. Investigators would later determine he left in a state of panic, driven by adrenaline, fear, and the realization of what he had done. The hunt for him would soon become national news. But in those first moments after he ran, the house was left in stillness. No sounds. No movement. A peaceful home transformed into something unrecognizable. It would be hours before authorities were alerted. Hours before the truth inside the home came to light. Hours before the community of Bushey learned that 3 of their most beloved residents were gone. The aftermath was heartbreaking. 3 lives cut short. A family gone in an instant. A neighborhood shaken by something unimaginable. But what police discovered next would spark one of the most intense manhunts in Hertfordshire history. Late afternoon light hung over the quiet cul-de-sac, the kind of warm, peaceful glow that usually signaled the end of an ordinary day in Bushey. But on this day, something was different. A family friend had grown worried. Messages hadn't been answered. Calls went straight to voicemail. The house, usually lively, always welcoming, remained still. When the friend reached the doorstep, the silence wasn't simply unusual, it was wrong. They hesitated only briefly before contacting authorities. Within minutes, police units moved into the neighborhood. Sirens didn't scream. They approached quietly, almost cautiously, as if the entire community already sensed something unspeakable had happened. First responders stepped into a home that had once been filled with laughter, shared routines, and the warmth of family life. What they discovered inside would stay with them forever. Police officers later described the moment in simple, heavy words. This was a scene no one should ever witness. Paramedics fought the instinctive heartbreak that comes from walking into tragedy rather than towards recovery. Many would later say that the emotional weight of that evening was unlike anything they had felt in years on the job. On that calm street in Bushey, a nightmare had taken root, and its cause was already gone. A suspect had vanished. A weapon was missing. 3 lives had been stolen, and a manhunt had just begun. The moment authorities realized Kyle Marcus Clifford had fled, an alert went out across Hertfordshire. This wasn't a typical missing person notice. This was urgent. High risk, potentially catastrophic. Police warned the public in careful but serious language, do not approach him. Stay indoors. Report sightings immediately. Clifford was believed to be armed, agitated, emotionally unstable, and carrying the same weapon believed to be used inside the Hunt home. Officers began searching wooded areas, footpaths, backroads, open fields, anywhere someone could disappear without a trace. Helicopters circled wide patches of countryside, their searchlights cutting through the evening darkness. Doorstep cameras picked up residents peering nervously from behind curtains. Local parents brought their children inside early, shops locked their doors before closing time. The media descended quickly, describing Clifford as a significant threat, urging communities to remain alert, and showing pictures of the man whose name was now known across the country. Detectives worked through the night, mapping Clifford's past routines, marking his known stress points, and scanning routes he could take by foot. Every hour mattered. Every sighting report mattered. The intensity of the search made one thing clear. This manhunt wasn't simply about capturing a suspect. It was about preventing further harm. Just after dawn, a tip came in. A quiet cemetery, surrounded by trees tucked away from the main road, had movement in an area where no one should have been at that hour. Patrol units converged immediately. Officers moved slowly, scanning the grounds with disciplined precision. As they reached a shaded corner near a stone monument, they saw him. Kyle Marcus Clifford, collapsed. Injured, breathing but barely responsive. He had sustained a self-inflicted crossbow wound, deep, violent, and ultimately life-altering. First responders stabilized him before carrying him out of the cemetery. By the time he was loaded into the ambulance, police confirmed what the nation had waited to hear. We found the man we were looking for. Clifford was transported under heavy guard, slipping in and out of consciousness. Doctors soon reported he was paralyzed from the waist down, likely for life. The manhunt had ended, but the story was far from over. Because what happened next shifted the case from a search to a reckoning. After the 22-hour manhunt came to an end, Kyle Marcus Clifford was transported to hospital under round-the-clock police guard. His injuries were severe, and as medical teams worked to stabilize him, the nation watched closely. News updates described a man who was physically weakened but still at the center of one of the most heartbreaking cases in recent British memory. As the weeks progressed, Clifford's condition shifted from critical to stable. Doctors confirmed what early assessments had already suggested. He would likely remain paralyzed from the waist down for the rest of his life. This physical state meant that his transition into the criminal justice system took place slowly and under carefully controlled arrangements. His first court appearance was conducted with heavy security, medical equipment nearby, and officials ensuring that despite his injuries, due process would be followed. The courtroom atmosphere was tense, quiet, somber. Family friends of the Hunts attended, sitting together for strength. Their faces reflected months of grief, shock, and the weight of questions that would never fully be answered. Members of the public who managed to enter the gallery expressed deep heartbreak, not only for the brutality of the events, but for the sheer senselessness of 3 lives taken from a family who had done nothing but love one another. Even seasoned reporters described the hearings as emotionally draining, with one calling it one of the most tragic family cases we've covered in the last decade. What began in a quiet cul-de-sac had now arrived at the steps of the justice system. And the charges were unlike anything Hertfordshire courts had handled in years. When the formal charges were read aloud, the courtroom was silent. Officers stood along the walls, the press leaned forward, and the judge's voice carried through the room with steady, measured force. Kyle Marcus Clifford was charged with 3 counts of murder, for the deaths of Carol, Louise, and Hannah Hunt. False imprisonment, for preventing the victims from escaping the danger inside their own home. Possession of an offensive weapon, referring to the crossbow and related equipment. A charge relating to inappropriate physical contact, phrased carefully by prosecutors to avoid sensationalism, describing actions that violated Louise's personal boundaries in the moments before her death. Each charge reflected a different part of the tragedy, each one adding layers to the reality of what had happened. Legal experts appearing on national broadcasts noted how unusual it was to see such a combination of crimes in one case. They pointed out that these charges revealed not only violence but control, fixation, and a deliberate intention to cause irreversible harm. Prosecutors made it clear, this was not a spontaneous act. It was planned, deliberate, and devastating. As the list of charges concluded, families in the gallery wiped tears from their eyes. Some held hands. Others stared ahead, visibly shaken. Everyone knew the next step would determine the future, not for Clifford but for the memory of the 3 women he had taken. January 2025. After months of proceedings, assessments, and evidence being prepared, the defendant was brought back to court. It was a cold, gray morning, one of those days in England where the sky seems to reflect the mood of the nation. Clifford was wheeled into the courtroom, accompanied by security and medical staff. Observers noticed he avoided eye contact with the public gallery. Some noted he seemed withdrawn. Others described him as expressionless. When the charges were read aloud once more, the judge asked him how he would plead. And in a quiet, unsteady voice, Kyle Marcus Clifford said one word: guilty. There was no negotiation. No attempt to deny responsibility. No argument presented. He pleaded guilty to all charges. Several members of the Hunt family's community gasped quietly. A few cried, holding on to one another. The plea meant they would not have to endure a lengthy trial. It meant the horror of the case would not be picked apart in the witness box. But it also meant hearing the truth spoken aloud, final, undeniable, devastating. Family friends gave brief statements outside the courthouse. One said, "Nothing will bring them back. But today at least there is accountability." Another added, "Carol, Louise, and Hannah were loved by so many. We want people to remember who they were, not what was done to them." The community of Bushey, still grieving months later, gathered outside the courthouse in a quiet show of solidarity. Candles, flowers, and handwritten notes created a small tribute near the steps. The legal chapter was nearing its end. But the weight of the sentencing still remained. At sentencing, the judge spoke firmly and without hesitation. He described the case as one of the most harrowing and calculated acts of family destruction seen in recent British history. Then he announced the decision. A whole life sentence. A punishment so rare that only a small number of offenders in the entire United Kingdom have ever received it. It meant Kyle Marcus Clifford would never be released. No parole. No review. No possibility of walking free again. Legal experts immediately took to national broadcasts, explaining just how severe and final this sentence truly was. They noted that whole life orders were typically reserved for the most extreme, premeditated crimes, those that demonstrated a complete disregard for human life. The public reaction was swift. Many expressed relief that the justice system recognized the gravity of the case. Others said justice could never fully match the loss of 3 beloved family members. In the courtroom, supporters of the Hunt family held hands, tears slipping down cheeks as the judge closed the session. It was a moment of accountability, but also one of profound sadness. Because even with the sentence delivered, even with the manhunt resolved, even with justice formally declared, nothing could undo what had been taken. And yet, the story of the Hunt family does not end with the courtroom. A legacy was forming. A movement was beginning. A community was rising to honor the lives of Carol, Louise, and Hannah. But the Hunt family story didn't end here. In the days after the tragedy, the Hunt family home in Bushey stood quiet. The curtains stayed drawn. The driveway remained empty. Neighbors walked past with lowered eyes, still trying to process the unthinkable. At the heart of this grief stood John Hunt, a man whose life until now had been defined by energy, voice, and passion, the calling card of a veteran BBC racing commentator. Now he was described by those close to him as broken, dismantled emotionally, barely able to speak for days. Friends said he often sat in silence, looking at photographs of his family with a kind of disbelief that never eased. One neighbor recalled seeing him step outside in the early morning just to stand on the porch, the last place his wife stood before opening the door that night. John lost his wife, his daughter Louise, his daughter Hannah. 3 lights of his life, extinguished within minutes. The UK responded with an outpouring of grief rarely seen for a single-family tragedy. Social media became a wave of condolences. Racing fans who had listened to John's voice for decades sent messages of love and strength. Strangers left supportive notes outside the Hunt home. Small memorials began forming along the quiet street. Bouquets of lilies. Candles glowing late into the evening. Handwritten messages like, "Bushey is with you," and "Your girls will never be forgotten." Hundreds gathered at vigils, holding candles while the names of Carol, Louise, and Hannah were read out slowly, each name carried by emotion. A local mother at one vigil said, "We didn't know them personally, but we felt their loss. This could have been any family. And that's what breaks your heart." The community wasn't mourning strangers. They were mourning neighbors. They were mourning goodness. They were mourning a family known for kindness, warmth, and the ability to brighten a room simply by walking into it. The weight of the tragedy lingered heavily, not only in Bushey but nationwide. As the details of the case became widely known, a new question emerged across the UK. How was a crossbow so easily accessible? Members of Parliament, commentators, and legal experts raised immediate concerns. While firearms in Britain face strict regulation, crossbows have long existed in a grey area, legal to own, requiring no license, and often overlooked by policymakers. Within days of the Hunt case gaining national attention, MPs called for urgent reviews of crossbow regulations. Public petitions gained thousands of signatures. News segments compared this tragedy with previous crossbow crimes. Although rare, crossbow attacks have appeared on the UK criminal landscape before, each time prompting discussions, each time fading without legislative change. This case was different. The fact that 3 women were killed in their own home by someone they knew, using a weapon purchased legally, sparked a wave of public outrage. One MP stated, "If laws cannot prevent every tragedy, they can at least close the gaps that allow them to happen so easily." Editorials questioned the reasoning behind allowing powerful, silent weapons to be obtained without checks. Commentators emphasized that crossbows can cause fatal harm while evading many traditional weapon restrictions. The Home Office responded, confirming that crossbow regulations would undergo immediate review. New safety proposals were being drafted. Public consultation would be prioritized. The tragedy forced the nation to confront a difficult truth. Sometimes laws evolve because a tragedy reveals what was hidden in plain sight. And the Hunt family's loss had become a catalyst for that change. As weeks turned into months, the community of Bushey began shifting from shock to healing. Slow, fragile, but determined. Local businesses organized fundraisers, with proceeds supporting trauma counseling, domestic awareness groups, and charities chosen by the Hunt family's close friends. Community centers held support gatherings offering grief counseling, safe spaces for discussion, comfort to neighbors who still struggled to sleep at night. Schools and youth groups created small memorial corners with memory books, drawings, flowers, written notes from students who said they wanted the family to feel loved from heaven. Soon, awareness campaigns emerged, fueled not by sensationalism but by heartfelt resolve. Posters gently encouraged people to check on friends going through difficult breakups, notice early signs of controlling behavior, speak out when something doesn't feel right. These campaigns carried a simple message: kindness is protection. Awareness saves lives. A local organizer said during one community meeting, If we don't learn something from this, the tragedy grows. But if we honor them by helping others, their light continues. And that became the heartbeat of Bushey in the months after the tragedy, a collective decision to turn grief into awareness and loss into purpose. A family remembered, a legacy that lives on. As we close this documentary, we return to the heart of this story, Carol, Hannah, and Louise Hunt. 3 women whose lives were defined not by tragedy but by love. Carol Hunt was the mother who placed everyone else first, gentle, attentive, steady as a warm light in every room she entered. She spent her life caring for others, nurturing 2 daughters who adored her, and supporting a husband who built his career with her unwavering encouragement. Louise Hunt was a dreamer, a creative spirit who turned her passion for animals into a budding career. She worked hard, stayed kind, and was beginning to truly discover her confidence and independence. Those who knew her say she was blossoming into a version of herself she had always hoped to be. Hannah Hunt was the bright spark, full of humor, ambition, and compassion. She had plans for the future, big ones, and she carried a heart full of care for her mother and sister. Whether helping a friend, giving advice, or simply laughing through late-night conversations, she had a way of making others feel lighter. Together, they were the kind of family every community admired, close, loving, always looking after one another. And that is how they deserve to be remembered. Not for what happened in their final moments, but for the countless beautiful moments that came before. This tragedy reminds us of the hidden dangers that can grow in relationships. Moments of control, patterns of possessiveness, and behaviors that may seem small at first, yet can escalate when left unspoken. Awareness matters. Checking in on friends matters. Listening without judgment matters. And as a society, our compassion must be louder than our silence. Through this case, the community of Bushey showed what unity looks like. Neighbors supporting one another, strangers leaving flowers, vigils glowing in the night, and messages poured out to remind the Hunt family that love does not fade with loss. The world cannot undo what happened, but it can learn. It can care. It can choose to honor Carol, Louise, and Hannah by reaching out, paying attention, and never ignoring the subtle signs that someone may need help. Their story becomes a legacy, one that calls for awareness, safety, and empathy. If this documentary touched you, and if you want to help keep the memories of Carol, Hannah, and Louise alive, please like, share, and subscribe. Your engagement helps this story reach more people, spreading awareness and reminding others to pay attention to the early signs of danger in relationships. And in the comments, let us know, what part of this case impacted you the most? Your voice helps this conversation continue, and together we honor their lives. Thank you for watching, for remembering, and for standing with the Hunt family in spirit.